All right. Welcome back to something more familiar for me. so, so welcome back to the rough mathematics of drawing, or me basically fixing this book. If you are interested in the book, by the way, look down below in the description. I'll go to the Indie Planet site that I have. So, first, let's actually just talk about faces. All right? Before we start talking about how to draw faces, since this is one of my familiar classes that I like to teach, we need to start talking about Westerns. So, because I don't have my class, hello class, by the way, and since you guys can't answer in the bottom, well, let's just start talking about Westerns. So, as I talk, ignore the drawing for now. So, the real question is like, well, as I usually post to my class, what is a Western? And the funniest thing is that a lot of times people look at me and say, what is a Western? So, for those who don't know what a Western is, a Western is basically a story or a genre that focuses mostly on the West in, let's say, 19th century America. So, in its purest form, cowboys. So, once you understand what a Western is, the next question is, what is a spaghetti Western? And usually the best part about this is, as you're asking these questions to kids, they give you a funny look and say, is it about spaghetti? Or a Western that has spaghetti in it? To viewers who know a little bit more, or who have actually seen a Western, it's common that the common misconception is the fact that a Western is a movie where no one actually counts the bullets. They're constantly shooting the gun over and over and over again without any understanding of how many bullets should actually be in a gun. So, let's fix some of that. A Western. At the time, and there's some people who are going to dispute this, but if you want to dispute that, go ahead and do it in the comments and I'll answer you back. So, a Western. Imagine currently we have movies that are all about the dominating genre right now is superheroes. From TV shows, movies, obviously with Marvel, books, if you watch like kids' cartoons, it's very heavy focus on superhero genre. Even surprisingly, anime has slowly flipped and jumped into this mess. So majority of the time now you're looking at characters with outlandish powers. Something that never was a thing back in the day. Before that, we had the space genre. Sci-fi genre was a thing thanks to Star Wars, and also thanks to the actual space race that was going on at the time in the 70s, I think. So these were the the genres kind of defined what was going on in the world at the time. So, again, Westerns at the time were, when Westerns were a major thing, we were trying to capture what America was. The growth of Hollywood introduced us filming what we were familiar with. What we were familiar with was the West and the slow creation of industrialism, which led to some dystopian stories, but Westerns. So what was familiar and understand what was cheap was to just work with Westerns. You already had most of the sets, most of the locations and stuff, and everyone just was familiar with Westerns anyway, so it just dominated the market. And because you're Hollywood, you kind of know how this should work. It's simply... what am I looking for? Sorry, I'm looking for something. No, I'll just make it up on my own. So, what was familiar, or because Hollywood created it, their whole thing was, let's create the obvious, easy stories we could think of. I'm not saying the stories were bad or anything. I'm just saying the archetypes were simple. Your heroes wore white hats. Your villains wore black hats. And it was just basically that. The other was the unfamiliar, non-white or scruffy white guy. And they were usually the bad guy, or considered the other. Let's give this guy this top here. There we go. So, Hollywood dominated Westerns. Sorry, I'm taking forever on this one. But Hollywood's push for Westerns flooded the market and then ended up flooding outside of America. So Japan gets it. They start looking at it and saying, this is cool, but we kind of want to make it more like... we want to kind of like it more familiar with our standards and what we know. So they dropped the guns, introduced swords, and now we have samurai films. Which are amazing. When it gets to Europe really loves the genre. Really loves the genre. But for them, they kind of want to make it more gritty. So they start doing their own take on the Western. Their stuff isn't that great. Like, their stuff... when they started creating their own works, they didn't focus on the concept of good versus evil, even though it was part of the genre. It was more, the good guy didn't always wear the good hats, the white hats, and the bad guy had some reasonings, but, you know, stuff like that. But, of course, the one that really kind of took off was the Sergio Leone movies. Oops. Oh, that was the other thing. I'm all over the place here. Sorry. So the thing about every other genre was they didn't have the big budget that Hollywood had. So in a sense, anything outside of Hollywood was more kind of considered like an indie market. They got whatever money they could, did the film, shot it, done. So, at one point, Hollywood kind of just looked at all these films coming out of Europe, especially Italy, and said to themselves, this is not how you write a story. Like, No, the good guys have to be good, bad guys have to be bad. You know, good guys can't have like a smirch, like I have a problem with them. Bad guys are irreparably bad, and there can't be any good qualities of them. So eventually they started calling these Italian westerns spaghetti westerns as a slur to basically say they're inferior to Hollywood. Then all of a sudden that one awesome movie comes out. Let me see if I can quickly find it. Ba, ba, ba. Wait a few seconds of it. So, Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Is it the defining movie that changed everything? Probably not, but it's the most popular thing that popped out. Even as a kid, I was like, what is this movie? What is this crazy 3-hour movie about this one guy named Blondie who is such a bad guy but kind of a nice good guy? He is the good one. The bad guy is horribly bad, but I mean, he was cool to look at. I mean, he's like basically, I wouldn't say he's Joker, but let's be real. Blue Eyes was cool. But the ugly one was the one in the middle. Yeah, he was bad. But you kind of wanted him to survive most of it because he was fun. He was the middle ground. That took off. So much so that it ended up being a trilogy. Everyone started looking at Italian films and started saying, those are some really grounded westerns. We like those. So much so that eventually Hollywood started changing their tune and started slowly kind of catering to that market. I think there was a few actors who really didn't like the style and thought this was not how you do it, but they changed with the times and now is it. So when you hit the sci-fi, when you hit the push for sci-fi, George Lucas comes in, looks at what he likes, and he's like, oh my goodness, if I could take a little bit of Western and then take a little bit of Flash Gordon and some of that samurai stuff that's been happening lately, and then mix them all together, he creates Star Wars, which is now a juggernaut. And when you look at when you start looking at most films, you get that little bit of that spaghetti Western flavor. Most of these movies now, the good guy isn't the greatest person, you know? Now, am I saying they're the ones who started this? No, because like detective films did the same thing. The good guy was never the greatest person in the world. But it's the fact that that character blended well with other genres, worked out for them in the end. So, why do I always talk about this? Because the very first thing I want you to learn is that there is no right way of drawing anything. There's no right way of creating anything. Don't let anyone tell you you're doing it wrong. Because to be honest, outside of their sphere, or their country, or their world, you're doing it right. So, let's finally get to what I'm drawing. To emphasize that one part. Face number one. When we're talking about out of the in multiple countries, so America, somewhat including South here. America usually focuses on using number one, character face number one, in grounded, superhero, realistic stories. When number two is more set up for kind of a comic, slapstick, children's show. This is how it dominates it. The moment you see the character, the moment you see number one, you know it's going to be a little more realistic. The moment you see number two, you realize it's going to be a more silly, more kid-centric. When you start seeing number three, it's basically America's attempt to making anime. Sorry, America. It's true. We have our own style of anime, and I'm slowly trying to understand it. Think more like Boondocks when you really look at it. But we have our own way of making anime, but we can't truly get it perfect, which is fine. Again, there's no right way. When you get to Europe is slightly different. So you'll see number one and you think, oh, okay, so it's like a serious story. But no, it could be introduced into any story, kind of like a comedy romance. It could be slapstick, whatever. Number two can actually be a very dark adult story. I've seen one where it was the story of two soldiers running around in Vietnam looking for, I think his wife or something like that. But yes, the characters looked like number two. Number three, for number one and number two, in Europe, it's not about the character dictating the genre. It's about the art style that the artist wants to reflect. Number three, especially in France, they've got this handled. They got anime down. They do have their own style of anime as well, but they've had anime longer than us in America. They've had it longer than us. So anime to them, I think they have the largest manga collection outside of Japan. So for them, it's like second nature to them. Once you hit Japan, obviously Japan is number three. But again, how do you approach it? How did they approach it? Number three is really set up like your main characters. The appeal is to sell your character, to make them pretty, cute, whatever. So the idea is make sure your main characters basically look like number three or any variation of number three. Cute, sellable, marketable. From there, what you end up doing is having a blend of number one and two, a simplified version of number one, in a way, that are background characters, adults, random other characters, just window dressing is what one and two are used for in anime. Now, I did bring up three countries, areas, but early South American art, you would have either number one with a little more shading, and there's a lot of emphasis on shadows. I'm doing a horrible job, but bear with me. So they double down on the darkness and the adult themes. And then number 2 can also be used for political comics. Jabs at the government. Right? Cute for kids, but adults get the joke too. Right. So that is the concept of face. That's the history, in a way, or how faces determine genre, or sometimes doesn't. That said, let's actually just get to faces. So if you're used to if you've known how to draw faces a little bit, or just studying, the most common thing you'll see is this circle with a T in the middle. What you're pretty much looking at is kind of the back of the skull and a rough outline of where you're going to put your face, your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. Let's see. So, the first arrow, this line right here, is your eye line. We'll dive into eyes different types of eyes later. Let's throw some eyebrows on top. They'll come in. They'll help you out in a bit. Nose. Your tip of your nose intersects with the circle. So it's generally, if you want to use a circle for that, or you could just flat out just draw a nose. Again, we'll talk about shapes later. The last arrow is actually the chin. Between the chin and the nose, you'll have your mouth. To get the jawline, start from the eye line and then shape out what type of face you want. Once you're done, add your ears. Your ears are actually between the eye line and the nose line. So you know where to start and where to stop. Now, you can do this without having to do the full circle line outline of the face. You can actually just start with a shape. If you've seen the last video, we're talking about fractions. This is where I start looking at this shape in thirds. The first thing I'm doing is finding the third of the as I break it down in my head to 3 different equal shapes, or as I turn it into a fraction of 3s, just split into thirds. I'm looking at the second part of it, the middle part, and this is where I'm adding my ear. Now, why ear first? The ears tell me where my eyes and my nose are. It's a weird nose. I don't know why I did that. Can I erase it? I still want that shape. There we go. All right, there we go. And once I have my ears and my nose, now I just have to add my mouth, which is between the nose and the chin. Now, the reason why I love this way of drawing faces is because, well, I like both ways, so it really doesn't matter which way of drawing faces. I use both in the end. The first way helps you when you actually want to turn your head into various angles. Basically, it helps with a more 3D perspective. While the other way helps you build more caricatures. Both help. What I actually do is I blend the two. Now here's how I blend it. The important thing is shapes. Shapes all the time. The main reason why I don't like America's Number One, this one, is because when we deal with American comic books always has the same face over and over and over and over again. It's the same shape of the face. Can't stand it. So, what I tend to do is I like to blend it. So, I will start with my base head and then build a shape around that. And then add all my features. Just like that. Now, the last thing that everyone always bugs me with, my classes usually, hair. Everything is shapes. Everything. So what you need to do is think to yourself, what is the outline of the hair that I want to draw? And you focus on that first. If it's short hair, you always start behind the ears. And draw the shape of the hair you want. Once you figure out your shape of the hair, figure out where the hair parts. And then you're bringing the hair back behind the ear with some contour lines. All right. Longer hair. If you have longer hair, draw the shape that you're looking for outside of the ears. So let's see, if I was looking at this head, the shape would be that. This head is more like that. figure out your contour lines to get the flow of the hair down. And then add some extra detail. And then don't be afraid to try different shapes. All right. So that's standard face looking forward at you. Now the last thing I want to do is talk about the various angles. So we're having the view, forward view. So a profile view. Let's get a new page. All right. So profile view. Basically takes the T outline and pushes it out to the side, to the edge. Wherever you want your character facing, that's where you draw that vertical line. The ears on the inside. I like starting with the ear first, because the ear connects to the jawline. And it shows you where you could like stop at that shape for the actual shape of the face. From there, eye is going to be on the inside. Nose is going to be on the outside. Nostril comes in. The mouth is going to go through. Inside, outside, through. All right? Inside, outside, through. The other view and the most common one I want you to start using when you're drawing is the 3/4 view. Now, why a 3/4 view? Actually, yeah, why a 3/4 view? Because in actuality, we're never really looking at each other straight on. Most times you ever see that is when you're taking a picture for your for any ID. Most of the time you are all usually looking at each other in a weird like angle, right? So how to make a 3/4 view. Basically figure out where the character is facing and then moves the line over, the vertical line over a bit to introduce that. And then start placing your eyes. Your nose is going to be is easy on this point, because what you're doing is just drawing a sideways version of your nose. For your mouth, just make sure your mouth leans towards the side of the face that has more space, more room on it. And then you're done. Last thing I want to talk about before I end for today. Tricks. Tricks to making your art a little more polished. I wouldn't say polished. I'd say tricks on little tips on how to trick the eye. That's the best way of putting it. So, say you suck at drawing 3/4 view. This is what I want you to try. Draw a forward view. All right, so I'm going to quickly draw forward view, and then what I'm going to do is figure out which way I want the character to face. Say I want the character to face that way. So left. If you want the character to face left, then draw the nose facing that way. That way. All right. Draw your mouth. And then erase the ear. Now, is it janky? Yes. What you're trying to do is slowly... It's like a subtle head turn of the character. You could even trick the eye even more. By having the eyes even look that way. Have the neck lean a little bit more towards that back to the ear that is exposed. Right? It is a forward-facing. The face is forward, but everything that you draw suggests that it's facing another way. Yeah, that's horrible hair, by the way. You could do the same. You could apply more depth when you use the sideways view as well. What you can actually do is bring out the forehead just a little bit. And then add a little bit of the eyelash behind that eye. Well, let me redraw it real quick. Make it easier to see. So, just by adding that subtle hint, there's an eye right behind the nose, makes it look like the head is slightly turned towards you. But yet you're still using the profile and a forward view of a face. All right? So try playing around with that, seeing if you get like some subtle detail to it. And see if that helps improve some of your art. From there, I think I've talked too much. So we're going to move on. I'm going to stop there, and then we're going to dive deeper into faces in part 2. All right? So thank you for watching with me. And hopefully you learned something. You want to subscribe? Go ahead. That's fine. If you don't worry about it.